Hello everyone and welcome to Kobean History. Today's video is about the history of the Colosseum. Earlier this year we went to Rome and I took some footage to make videos out of, so you'll see those in the next few months. But we're starting with Rome's most iconic building, the Colosseum. It is lesser well known as the Flavian amphitheater, which is actually the official name, named after the Flavian dynasty, which built the amphitheater. So in this video we will take a look at the history of its location, construction and use. Starting with the location, the Colosseum is situated just east of the Roman Forum, which was seen as the center of ancient Rome. The site chosen for the amphitheater is a flat area in a low-lying valley between the Salian, Esquiline and Palatine hills of Rome. These were three of the 7 main hills which Rome was built upon. By the 2nd century BC, this area had been densely inhabited by the people of Rome. Due to the houses being so close to each other, fires were a real threat. They happened occasionally, but in 64 AD, this area had been completely devastated by the Great Fire of Rome, which lasted 6 days. Following the devastation, Emperor Nero seized much of this area to add it to his personal domain and built the grandiose Domus Aurea, also known as Nero's Golden House. This was a grandiose complex which took up the whole valley as well as parts of the 3 hills surrounding it. The place where the Colosseum now stands was the site of an artificial lake fed by aqueducts and surrounded by pavilions and gardens. A gigantic 30-meter high bronze statue known as the Colossus of Nero was erected nearby the entrance of his domain, and it was built to his own likeness. When Nero died, the statue was modified to represent the sun god Sol by adding a solar crown to his head. Around the year 127, it was moved by Emperor Hadrian to a spot just outside the Flavian amphitheater, and it took as many as 24 elephants to accomplish this. And as you've probably already guessed, this is where the nickname Colosseum comes from. The statue is thought to have fallen down or been destroyed sometime after the 4th century. However, this nickname was only later given to the building in the Middle Ages. The statue itself is mostly forgotten about, but its base still survives to this day, which gives us a clear image of where the statue once stood. After the Great Jewish Revolt of 70 AD was suppressed, Emperor Vespasian funded the construction of the Flavian amphitheater from his own generals a share of the loot taken from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The artificial lake was filled in to make room for the amphitheater, and other supporting buildings like gladiator schools were built nearby. This was a popular decision with the people of Rome, not only because it symbolized the reclaiming of the land taken by Nero, but also in contrast to most other amphitheaters, which were built on the outskirts of the city. This new one would stand in the heart of Rome. Part of what remained of the Domus Aurea, on the Oppian Hill, was later buried by Emperor Trajan to make room for his public bathhouse. The ruins left by Nero were stripped of his marble and other valuable materials to be used in the new bathhouse. But Trajan did not destroy the actual structure. Instead, he buried it under earth and built the bathhouse on top of it. This caused the ruins to be relatively well preserved, and we went to visit that as well, which I will show in another video. Construction of the Colosseum began in 72 AD. Along with the loot that funded the project, an estimated 100,000 Jews were taken back to Rome after the revolt, and was used as a workforce to aid in the construction, such as working in the quarries at Tivoli, where the travertine stone was quarried, and transporting it 20 miles away to Rome. Travertine was one of the main building materials of the amphitheater. It was set out without mortar and were held together by iron clamps. Among other materials that were used was tuff and brick-faced concrete. The slaves did not work on the construction itself, or at least not massively. This job was put in the hands of skilled professionals, such as Roman builders, engineers, artists, painters and decorators. When Vespasian died in 79 AD, the building had been completed up to the 3rd story and the construction was finished under the reign of his son Titus in 80 AD, with the inaugural games being held either the same year or the year after. The building was remodeled under Vespasian's younger son, Emperor Domitian, who succeeded his brother after his death in 81 AD. Domitian constructed the Hypogeum, a series of underground tunnels used to house animals and slaves. He also added a gallery to the top of the Colosseum to increase its seating capacity. The tunnels were also connected to nearby buildings linked to the amphitheatre, such as the Ludus Magnus, which was the largest of the gladiator schools in Rome. It had its own miniature training arena, which in itself was a popular attraction for Roman citizens. Other schools were also linked through these tunnels, such as the Dacian and the Gallic schools, where fighters from those regions were trained, as well as a school where fighters of animals were trained, and other buildings like the armory, machinery rooms, and facilities to treat wounded gladiators, as well as a building where the dead ones were stripped of their armor and disposed of. Now we'll have a closer look at the style of the amphitheatre. Unlike the earlier Greek theatres, which were built into hillsides, the Roman amphitheatres were generally freestanding structures. But unlike the common Roman amphitheatre, the Flavian amphitheatre derives its design from that of two Roman theatres placed back to back, which results in an elliptical shape and not a circle. Mast corbels were positioned around the top of the outer wall. They were used to hold up the masts that held the velarium. This was a large retractable curtain used to keep the spectators in the shade and keep them dry when it rained. And due to it sloping down towards the center, it caught the wind to provide a breeze to the spectators. Professional sailors were enlisted to operate it, due to it working similar to a ship's sail, only bigger. The Colosseum's huge crowd capacity made it essential that the venue could be filled or evacuated quickly. Its architects adopted a solution very similar to those of the modern-day stadiums to deal with the same problem. The amphitheatre was ringed by 80 entrances at the ground level, 76 of which were used by the ordinary spectators. Each entrance and exit was numbered, as was each staircase. The northernmost entrance was reserved for the Roman Emperor, whilst the other three axial entrances were most likely used by the elite. All four axial entrances were richly decorated with painted stucco reliefs, of which these are some fragments that survived. In the arches on the second and third floor stood framed statues, probably depicting gods and other figures from classical mythology. The triangular brick wedge at the end of the outer wall is a modern addition, constructed in the early 19th century to support the crumbling walls. The floor of the arena was made out of wood covered by sand, and this is where the word arena is derived from, as the Latin word for sand is harina. Underneath it is the hypogeum, literally meaning underground. It consists of two subterranean levels, where all sorts of props, animals and gladiators were held before the contest began. 80 vertical shafts provided instant access to the arena through trapdoors, which could be used to lift up animals and scenery pieces. So when the show began, the stage would appear seamlessly with animals, props and scenery pieces, such as fake trees, being lifted up through these concealed entrances. Now we'll talk about what the Colosseum was used for, most well known of which is gladiatorial combat and beast fights. But it was used for a lot more than that. Other public spectacles that were held there include animal hunts with great varieties of exotic wild beasts, executions, reenactments of famous battles, and dramas based on classical mythology. And it is said that even for a short time, mock sea battles were held there. They would divert the water from aqueducts to the arena and fill it up with water to create a lake to stage them on. But this was no longer possible after the hypogeum was built. The spectacles were often staged amid elaborate sets of moving trees and buildings, and occasionally they were held on a huge scale. Trajan is said to have celebrated his victories in Dacia with contests involving 11,000 animals and 10,000 gladiators lasting 123 days. During intervals, the public was entertained with the executions, where the condemned were sent into the arena naked and unarmed, where they would get mauled by a variety of wild animals. When they ran out of people to execute, they filled the intervals with performances of acrobats and magicians. The amphitheatre was also used to house shows called munera. These were given by private individuals rather than the state. They had strong religious elements, but they were also used as demonstrations of power and prestige by a certain family, and were very popular with the public. Recreations of natural scenes were also held in the arena. painters, technicians and architects, which construct a simulation of a forest with real trees and bushes planted in the arena floor, and animals would then be introduced to the scenery. Such scenes might have been simply used to display a natural environment for the urban population, or otherwise be used as the backdrop for hunts or dramas depicting episodes of mythology. They were also occasionally used for executions in which the hero of the story, played by the condemned person, was killed in one of various gruesome but mythologically authentic ways, such as being mauled by wild beasts or being burned to death. Spectators were given tickets in the form of numbered pottery shards, on which they were assigned an entrance, section and row to sit on. We can't exactly say how many people would have fit at max capacity, because individual seats were not numbered. They accessed their seats via vomitoria, passageways that opened up into a tier of seats from below or behind. These quickly dispersed the people into their correct seats, and upon conclusion of the event, or in the case of an emergency evacuation, these vomitoria permitted the people to exit within only a few minutes. The name vomitoria derives from the Latin word for a rapid discharge, and the English word vomit derives from this as well. Special boxes were provided at the north and south end of the amphitheatre for the Roman Emperor and the Vestal Virgins respectively. These provided the best view of the arena. Flanking them at the same level was a broad platform or podium for the senatorial class, who were allowed to bring their own chairs, and the names of some 5th century senators can still be seen engraved in the stonework today, presumably reserving that spot for their use. The tier above the senators was occupied by the non-senatorial noble class or knights. The next level up was originally reserved for the ordinary Roman citizen, and was divided into two sections. The lower part was for the wealthy citizens, whilst the upper part was for the poor citizens. Specific sectors were provided for other social groups, for instance boys with their tutors, soldiers on leave, foreign dignitaries, scribes, heralds, priests and so on. Inscriptions identified the areas reserved for the specific groups. The gallery at the very top that was later added by Domitian was used by the slaves, common poor and women. This would have been either standing room only or would have had very steep wooden benches. Some groups were banned altogether from the amphitheatre, notably gravediggers, actors and former gladiators. Stone seating, which was later replaced by marble, were provided for the citizens and nobles, who presumably would have brought their own cushions with them. Over there you can see a small section of the stone seating that remains. In the rest of the Colosseum, the stone seating was removed for the stone to be used elsewhere. That also caused these hallways, which used to be covered by the seating above, to now be open to the air, and you can see the stairs that would lead to the seating areas as well here. Gladiatorial fights were last mentioned around the year 435, and animal hunts continued at least until the year 523. But the arena continued to be used for other contests until sometime in the 6th century. At the end of the century, a small chapel was built into the structure of the amphitheatre, though this did not give the building as a whole any particular religious significance. The arena was then converted into a cemetery. The vaulted spaces in the arcades under the seating were converted into housing and workshops. It stayed like this until the turn of the 13th century, when the Frangipani family took over the Colosseum and fortified it, using it as a sort of castle. It was in 1349 that the earthquake caused severe damage to the Colosseum, resulting in the collapse of the southern outer wall. Much of the rubble was then reused to build other buildings in Rome. After the earthquake, a religious order moved into the northern part of the building and stayed there until the early 1800s. And a lot of the interior of the Colosseum was also stripped of its stone to be reused in other buildings. The marble of the facade was burned to make quicklime, and the metal clamps that held the marble slabs and the stonework in place were pried and hacked out of the stone to be smelted down and reused. This left the distinct marks on the outer walls of the Colosseum today. These marks can also be seen in other Roman ruins where similar stripping took place. During the 16th and the 17th century, the church sought a productive role for the Colosseum. Pope Sixtus V planned to turn the building into a wool factory to provide employment for Rome's prostitutes. But this plan fell through with his premature death. In 1671 the church authorized its use for bullfights, but due to public outcry this idea was abandoned. In 1749 Pope Benedict XIV endorsed the view that the Colosseum was a sacred site where early Christians had been martyred. He forbade the use of the Colosseum as a quarry, and consecrated the building to the Passion of Christ and installed Stations of the Cross, declaring it sanctified by the blood of the Christian martyrs who perished there. However, there is no historical evidence to support Benedict's claims, nor is there even any evidence of anyone before the 16th century suggesting this might have been the case. Either way, even if this wasn't true, it was still a good thing, because it preserved the Colosseum from any further damage. Later popes initiated restoration projects, such as removing the extensive vegetation which had overgrown the structure, and in 1807 and 1827 the brick wedges were constructed to support the outer wall, and the interior was repaired in further decades. The arena substructure was also partially excavated by the church, but in the 1930s it was fully exposed under Benito Mussolini. Today the Colosseum is one of Rome's most popular tourist attractions and is listed as one of the 7 wonders of the world. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see my further videos that I'll make about Rome or any other history related topic, you can subscribe to my channel.